May I play for food? The shy voice of the 12-year-old girl echoed through the lobby of the Continental Hotel, cutting through the elegant conversations like a sharp blade. People stopped talking, turning to face the little black girl who dared to interrupt the city's most exclusive charity cocktail party. Amelia Washington stood at the entrance to the main hall, her large, hopeful eyes fixed on the Steinway grand piano gleaming beneath the crystal chandeliers. Her simple, slightly baggy clothes contrasted starkly with the designer dresses and tailored suits around her. She clutched a worn backpack to her chest as if it were a protective shield. "How did that kid get in here?" whispered a platinum-haired woman, clutching her champagne glass tightly. "Where's security?" The event was a gala to raise funds for underprivileged youth, an irony that did not escape Amelia, who had spent the last week sleeping in different shelters. She had heard about the event when she passed by the hotel entrance earlier, and something inside her compelled her to try to get in. Victoria Sterling, the event organizer and heir to a family fortune, approached with measured steps. At 45, she epitomized the city's social elite, educated, refined, and utterly convinced of her moral superiority. "Darling," she said with a condescending smile, "this is no place for you. There's a McDonald's 2 blocks from here." "I just wanted to play," Amelia repeated, her voice gaining unexpected firmness. "Just one song in exchange for a plate of food." Laughter began to ripple through the crowd. "She thinks she can play the piano," scoffed a man in a navy blue suit. "She probably doesn't even know which key is C." "It's cute how imaginative these kids are," added another woman, shaking her head with feigned pity. "They watch a movie and think they can do anything." But Amelia didn't look down. There was something in his posture, a quiet dignity, a silent confidence that seemed out of place in a child of his situation, as if she knew something that everyone else there was completely unaware of. Dr. Robert Chun, a renowned pianist and one of the judges of national competitions, watched the scene from the back of the hall. He had noticed how the girl's eyes fixed on the piano with a reverence he rarely saw, even in advanced students. There was recognition there, familiarity. "Victoria," Dr. Chun approached. "Maybe we should let her play. After all, we're here to help talented young people, aren't we?" Victoria laughed, a crystalline cruel sound. "Robert, please look at her. Children like this don't have access to music education. It's impossible." What none of them knew was that Amelia had grown up for the first 8 years of her life in a home where music was as essential as breathing. Her grandmother, a classical pianist who never achieved the recognition she deserved because of the color of her skin, had been her first and only teacher. When her grandmother died and Amelia ended up in the foster care system, she carried with her not only the pain of loss, but a talent that even she did not fully understand. While everyone looked at her with disdain, Amelia stood firm as someone who had weathered much worse storms and learned to find strength in her own vulnerability. His fingers moved unconsciously, as if playing an invisible melody, a habit he had developed to calm himself in the most difficult moments. If you are enjoying this story of overcoming adversity and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple, innocent question was about to silence a room full of prejudice and reveal a talent that would redefine everything those people thought they knew about human potential. Victoria Sterling crossed her arms and laughed theatrically, as if she had heard the most absurd joke in the world. "Very well, dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Since you insist so much, let's make a little deal. You can play, but with a few conditions." The crowd drew closer, sensing the smell of a cruel spectacle about to unfold. Victoria loved being the center of attention, especially when she could demonstrate her moral superiority in front of other members of high society. "First condition," Victoria announced, raising a perfectly manicured finger. "You will play only one song and we will choose which one. Second condition. If he manages to play decently, I will personally pay for a full dinner. But," she paused dramatically, "when he fails miserably, as we know he will leave here immediately and never bother respectable people again." "How cruel," whispered an older woman at the back of the group, but her voice was drowned out by the approving laughter of the other guests. Amelia remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the piano. Something was happening in her mind, memories mingling with the present. She could almost hear his grandmother Betty's soft voice. "When people try to belittle you, let the music speak for you, my dear. Music doesn't lie, and it knows no prejudice." "I accept," Amelia said simply, her voice clear and firm. Dr. Chun watched, fascinated. There was something about the girl's posture, the way she looked at the instrument, that intrigued him deeply. In 30 years of evaluating pianists, he had developed an instinct for recognizing true talent, and something about this child made his expert senses tingle. "Perfect." Victoria clapped her hands. Now for the music. She looked around, searching for the most difficult and humiliating option possible. Her eyes settled on James Morrison, a mediocre pianist who played in local bars. James, dear, what would be a suitable piece for our young artist? James smiled mischievously. How about Beethoven's Für Elise? Everyone who has ever sat at a piano at least once in their life tries to play that piece. If she really knows anything, she should be able to do it. The choice drew laughter from the crowd. Für Elise was considered a beginner's piece among laymen, but to play it perfectly required refined technique and years of practice. It was the perfect trap. If Amelia knew only the basics, he would try to play and fail disastrously. If he knew nothing, he wouldn't even be able to start. Excellent choice, Victoria applauded. A song that any child who has ever had a piano lesson knows. There are no excuses for failure. Amelia nodded and walked toward the piano. Each step seemed charged with a quiet determination that made some people at the back of the hall feel inexplicably uncomfortable. There was something wrong with that scene. A 12-year-old child should not carry such dignity in the face of such humiliation. When she sat down on the piano bench, adjusting it to the perfect height with precise, familiar movements, Dr. Chun felt a chill run down her spine. Those were not the movements of a beginner. Look at that, Victoria sneered to the guests closest to her. She doesn't even know how to sit properly on the bench. She's probably never seen a real piano in her life. But Dr. Chun had noticed exactly the opposite. The adjustment of the bench, the upright posture, the way Amelia's hands hovered over the keys in a perfect classical position. These were details that took years to master. Memories flooded Amelia's mind like a wave. Her grandmother, her mother, Betty Washington, had been one of the first black pianists to try to enter the city's conservatory in the 1960s. Her talent was undeniable, but the doors remained closed due to the prejudice of the time. Betty channeled her passion by teaching children from the community in her small home, transforming his old upright piano into a portal to the world of classical music. Music is a universal language, Amelia, Betty used to say, as she guided her granddaughter's little fingers over the keys. When you play from the heart, people listen with their soul, not their eyes. Amelia had spent countless hours at that piano, absorbing not only technique, but the deep musical understanding that only a true master can impart. When Betty died and Amelia was separated from everything she knew, music remained her only constant companion. Played on imaginary pianos during lonely nights in shelters. We're waiting, Victoria said, drumming her impatient fingers. Or have you given up before even trying? Amelia took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. The touch was like electricity. After months without playing a real instrument, feeling the keys under his fingers was like rediscovering a lost part of her soul. The first note echoed through the hall with a crystal purity that made several people look up in surprise. It wasn't the hesitant, amateurish sound they had expected. It was a note played with the confidence of someone who knows every nuance of the instrument intimately. Dr. Chun approached discreetly, her professional curiosity fully aroused. That first note had been played with impeccable technique. Precise attack, perfect sustain, controlled timbre. These were details that only years of serious training could produce. Coincidence, Victoria murmured, but her voice had lost some of its previous confidence. Amelia began the main melody of Für Elise, and every note that flowed from her hands was like a small miracle. There was no hesitation, no technical error. The music emerged naturally, as if she and the piano were part of a single organism. But there was something else. An emotional maturity in the interpretation that left Dr. Chun completely stunned. The way she phrased the melodic passages, how she controlled the dynamics, how she allowed the silence between the notes to speak as much as the music itself. It was the work of a mature artist, not an untrained child. The hall had fallen completely silent. The champagne glasses remained motionless in the guests' hands. The conversation ceased. Even the waiters stopped moving. Everyone was mesmerized by that small figure at the piano, creating music of unexpected and breathtaking beauty. Victoria felt a growing uneasiness in her stomach. This was not going according to plan. The public humiliation she had orchestrated was turning into something completely different, something that was totally beyond his control. As Amelia played, lost in the music that flowed through her like a force of nature, a single question echoed in the minds of everyone present. Who was this girl really? And what secrets was her music about to reveal? As Amelia navigated the most complex passages of Für Elise, Dr. Chun felt his heart race. 40 years of evaluating musical talent had honed his instincts, and what he was witnessing defied all logic. The girl's technique was not just competent, it was extraordinary. The descending arpeggio passage, which stumped even advanced students, flowed from her fingers like crystal-clear water. Each note had weight and purpose. Each pause breathed with mature musicality. Dr. Chun watched in fascination as she controlled the sustained pedal with the precision of a professional concert pianist. "This is impossible," he muttered to himself, moving even closer to the piano. Victoria, sensing the change in the atmosphere, felt the first alarm bells go off in her mind. The conversations had ceased completely. Even the waiters had stopped serving, mesmerized by the music that transformed the hall into an impromptu concert hall. "She must have memorized this song from some YouTube video," Victoria said loudly enough for others to hear, desperately trying to regain control of the narrative. Kids these days copy anything from the internet. But his explanation sounded increasingly weak. What Amelia was doing transcended imitation. It was pure interpretation, loaded with an emotional understanding that only came with years of serious study, and more importantly, experience. She had witnessed countless prodigies in her career, from 5-year-olds playing Mozart to teenagers mastering Rachmaninoff. But she had rarely seen such a combination of impeccable technique and musical maturity in someone so young, especially in such unlikely circumstances. Amelia reached the climax of the piece, where the main melody returns with renewed force after the virtuosic passages. Her hands danced across the keys with a familiarity that revealed hundreds, perhaps thousands of hours of dedicated practice. It was impossible to fake that level of intimacy with the instrument. Memories flowed through the music like an underground river. Amelia could hear his grandmother Betty's voice echoing through the years. "Music isn't about playing the right notes, my dear. It's about telling a story that only you can tell." Betty Washington had been more than a teacher. She was a visionary who saw the future through her granddaughter's small fingers. Born in 1940, she grew up at a time when black pianists were systematically excluded from prestigious conservatories and concert halls. Her response was to turn his own home into a musical temple where children from the community discovered that classical music belonged to them too. "The world will try to tell you that certain things aren't for people like us," Betty used to say as she adjusted Amelia's posture on the piano bench. "But music knows no color, knows no poverty, knows no limits. It only knows truth." For 8 blessed years, Amelia absorbed not only technique, but musical philosophy. Betty taught her that each composer had a unique language. Chopin spoke of longing, Beethoven of struggle and triumph, Mozart of crystal and joy. More importantly, she learned that her musical voice was equally valuable. When Betty died suddenly of a heart attack, Amelia didn't just lose her grandmother, she lost her world. The foster care system separated her from music, from the piano, from everything that gave meaning to her existence. For 4 years, she carried melodies only in her mind, playing imaginary keyboards in the cold dormitories of shelters. But now, in this surreal moment at the Hotel Continental, it all came back. Every lesson, every gentle correction, every word of encouragement from Betty flowed through her hands as if no time had ever passed. Dr. Chun watched in awe as Amelia played the final coda of the piece. The way she controlled the dynamics, starting pianissimo and building to a majestic forte before returning to the delicate whisper of the beginning, revealed a musical understanding that took decades to develop. "Please tell me you're seeing this too," he whispered to his colleague beside him, a piano professor at the local university. "This child, she's not just talented, she's a phenomenon." Victoria Sterling felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Her carefully orchestrated strategy to humiliate a vulnerable child was turning into the exact opposite of what she had planned. Instead of confirming her prejudices, Amelia was forcing everyone to question their most basic assumptions about class, race, and merit. "It has to be a trick," Victoria murmured to her closest friends. "No one learns piano like that out of nowhere. She must have had expensive private lessons hidden somewhere." But even as she spoke, Victoria knew her words sounded increasingly desperate. The child before her was demonstrating a level of excellence that money alone could not buy. She was playing with soul, with lived history, with a depth that came from places privilege could never reach. Amelia played the final chords of Furice, with a delicacy that made several people in the audience hold their breath. When the last echo died in the absolute silence of the hall, she kept her hand suspended over the keys for a moment, as if reluctant to break the magical connection between her and the instrument. Then slowly, she turned on the bench to face the silent crowd. There was no trace left of the shy child who had begged for food. In his place sat a young artist who had just claimed his place in the world through the universal language of music. Dr. Chun was the first to break the silence, her hands coming together in respectful applause that echoed through the hall like distant thunder. Gradually, others joined in until the Continental Hotel vibrated with genuine acclaim. Victoria looked around in growing panic. Her attempt at public humiliation had turned into a celebration of the talent she had tried to deny. Worse still, she could see in the eyes of the other guests a question that haunted her. If they were so wrong about this child, what else were they wrong about? Amelia remained seated calmly, allowing the applause to wash over her like rain after a long drought. But behind her eyes, something was forming. Not arrogance, but a growing understanding of her own power. She had proven her point, but this was only the beginning. Dr. Chun approached the piano, her expression a mixture of admiration and professional curiosity. "Child," he said softly, "may I ask where you studied? His teacher must be extraordinary." Amelia looked him straight in the eye, and for a moment she allowed all the pain of the last 4 years to show in her eyes. "My grandmother taught me," she replied simply. "She said music was the one thing no one could take away from me." The answer struck Dr. Chun like lightning. A grandmother, not an expensive conservatory. Family love, not purchased privilege. Talent cultivated at home, not in elite institutions. Everything he believed about how musical excellence was created was being challenged by a 12-year-old who had just redefined her expectations of greatness. While the hall still echoed with reluctant admiration, Amelia knew she had crossed the line. She could no longer pretend to be just a lost child begging for food. Her music had revealed too much, promised too much. Now, with all eyes on her and expectation hanging in the air like thick perfume, she had to decide how far she was willing to take that revelation, and whether she was ready to show these privileged people what a worthless child could really do when music spoke through her soul with a force of generations of denied dreams. Dr. Chun approached the piano with careful steps, as if approaching something sacred. "Young lady," he said, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to ask you a very important question. What is your full name?" "Amelia Washington," she replied, maintaining the same calm she had shown throughout the evening. The name struck Dr. Chun like a bolt of lightning. His eyes widened, and he took a step back. "Washington. Betty Washington. Are you Betty Washington's granddaughter?" Amelia nodded silently, and Dr. Chun covered his face with his hands. "My God," he murmured. "Betty Washington was one of the greatest pianists this country has ever produced. She should have played at the best conservatories in the world, but her voice faltered, laden with ancient pain." Victoria watched the exchange with growing unease. "Robert, what are you talking about? Who is Betty Washington?" Dr. Chin turned to her with an expression that mixed disbelief and disgust. Victoria Betty Washington was a legend in the music community. A virtuoso who was systematically excluded from conservatories and concert halls because of her color. She became one of the most respected private teachers in the country, training dozens of professional musicians. The crowd murmured, some recognizing the name from their own musical experiences. Betty Washington was whispered about in musical circles as a teacher who could transform any dedicated student into an exceptional artist. "But that was decades ago," Victoria said, her voice sounding increasingly defensive. "And even if that story is true, it doesn't change the fact that she's a homeless person begging for money at a private event." It was then that Amelia rose from the piano bench. For the first time that evening, she allowed her true personality to emerge completely. The submissive posture disappeared, replaced by an unshakable dignity that made several people in the room recoil unconsciously. "Miss Sterling," Amelia said, her voice clear and firm, "you are right about one thing. He shouldn't be here tonight." She paused, letting the silence settle in. "I should be at Carnegie Hall in New York, where I have a recital scheduled for next week." A deathly silence fell over the room. Victoria felt the floor move beneath his feet. "My name is Amelia Washington," she continued, "and I am the youngest classical pianist ever accepted into the Juilliard School's Young Artists program. I am also the current national champion of classical piano for under 15s. She paused again, allowing the information to sink in. "The reason I am here tonight is not because I need food or money. Dr. Chun watched, fascinated, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place in his mind. "The documentary," he murmured. "You're making the documentary." Amelia nodded. "Exactly. I'm collaborating with PBS on a documentary about prejudice and access to the arts. My producer suggested that I attend charity events for arts education, disguised as a young person without resources to document how privileged people really treat those they consider inferior." The revelation fell on the room like a bomb. Victoria felt all the blood drain from his face. You're filming us?" "Hidden cameras," Amelia confirmed calmly. "High-definition audio and video. Everything that happened here tonight has been documented for national broadcast." Victoria looked around desperately, searching for cameras for any sign that this was a cruel prank. "That's illegal. You can't film us without consent." "Actually," Dr. Chen interjected, his voice laden with dark satisfaction, "you signed image releases when you came in. It's written quite clearly on the ticket that this event could be filmed for documentary purposes." He smiled wryly. "I'm sure no one read the fine print." The crowd began to stir, people whispering frantically to each other, some already reaching for his phone to check his ticket. The panic was palpable. "The first part of the documentary," Amelia continued, ignoring the growing chaos, "will focus on how talent and potential are overlooked when they come packaged in appearances that defy privileged expectations. The second part will show how people who claim to be defenders of the arts react when confronted with real art coming from unexpected sources. I simply documented her true personalities when she thought there would be no consequences." Dr. Chun approached Amelia with deep respect. "May I ask, what do you intend to do with this recording?" "The documentary will air nationally next month," Amelia explained. "But I've also created a YouTube channel where I post shorter versions of these social experiments. My latest video, filmed at a similar event in Boston, currently has 2.5 million views, especially when it comes from people who pretend to be virtuous while practicing the very prejudices they claim to fight." The crowd watched in horror as Victoria faced the reality of her situation. In a matter of days, her cruelty would be seen by millions of people. His name would forever be associated with the kind of prejudice and elitism she had so clearly demonstrated. "Mrs. Sterling," Amelia said, addressing the event organizer directly, "you have spent this entire evening telling me that people like me don't deserve to be in places like this, that we have no value, talent, or right to participate in high culture." Her voice gained a strength that silenced the entire hall. "Tomorrow, the whole world will see exactly the kind of person you really are." Victoria tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The magnitude of her impending public humiliation was simply too great to process. Dr. Chun looked around the room, seeing the panic on the faces of the other guests. "How many other events have you filmed?" "This is the 12th, Amelia replied. "And it's always the same. People who claim to value art and education, but who immediately judge and dismiss talent based solely on appearances." She turned to face Victoria one last time. "The difference between you and her, Mrs. Sterling, is that when I was actually homeless for a few months after my grandmother's death, I learned that dignity doesn't come from money or status. It comes from how we treat other human beings when we think no one is watching." The silence in the hall was deafening. Every person present knew that his words and actions that night would be judged by millions of strangers, and most knew that there was no possible defense for what he had demonstrated. As Amelia discreetly collected a small recording device hidden in her backpack, one question hung in a heavy air of the Continental Hotel: how many other privileged and prejudiced people had discovered too late that the young woman they had despised had the power to reveal her true nature to the whole world? 6 months later, Victoria Sterling watched from the window of his small apartment as the limousine pulled up in front of Carnegie Hall. Amelia Washington, now wearing an elegant concert gown, waved to fans before entering the theater where she would make her debut as the youngest soloist of the season. The documentary Faces of Discrimination had gone viral, racking up over 15 million views on YouTube alone. Victoria had become the national symbol of elitist hypocrisy, losing not only her position in all charitable organizations, but also the respect of a high society she valued so much. Former charity event organizer exposed as prejudiced in viral documentary read the headlines in local newspapers for weeks. Her luxury events company lost all its important clients, and he now worked as an assistant at a small law firm trying to rebuild a reputation that might never fully recover. Meanwhile, Dr. Chun had become Amelia's official mentor, helping her navigate the world of professional classical music. The Continental Hotel, embarrassed by the public exposure, created a scholarship program for underprivileged young musicians, naming Amelia as its official ambassador. "Music knows no color, social class, or zip codes," Amelia said in her first national interview after the incident. "She only knows truth and passion, And when you have both, no barrier can stop you. The impact of the documentary transcended entertainment. Music schools across the country started community outreach programs, conservatories revised as admissions processes, and hundreds of talented young people from underprivileged communities were given opportunities that had previously been denied to them. Victoria, watching Amelia triumph where she herself had tried to humiliate her, finally understood the most painful lesson of her life. Dignity and talent cannot be bought with money, inherited with surnames, and definitely not measured by the color of one's skin or the address where one comes from. Amelia's best revenge was not to destroy Victoria. It was to prove that true greatness transcends prejudice, and that sometimes those we least expect carry the most extraordinary gifts. If this story of overcoming adversity touched his heart, subscribe to the channel.